The Dark Woods was a place where no one dared to enter after sunset, for as long as anyone could remember. Stories have been told about the eerie forest at the edge of town. Some said it was haunted, others whispered about creatures that lurked in the shadows, waiting to snatch anyone who wandered too close. But the most chilling tales were about the whispers, the soft, ghostly voices that could be heard just beyond the trees, calling out names, luring people deeper into the darkness, never to return. The forest had always been shrouded in an unnatural gloom. Even the towering trees, with their twisted branches, seemed to reach out like skeletal hands, blocking out the sunlight and casting long, ominous shadows on the ground. The air inside the forest was thick and heavy, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was as if the forest itself was alive, breathing, waiting. People in the nearby town spoke of strange occurrences near the edge of the woods, footprints that led to nowhere, animals that vanished without a trace, and, of course, the whispers. Those who had ventured too close often returned pale and trembling, unable to explain the fear that had gripped them. Some said they had heard the whispers soft, almost gentle, but filled with something dark, something dangerous. It was these stories that intrigued a group of friends, daring them to explore the dark woods. They were young and curious, convinced that the tales were just that stories meant to scare children. But as they stood at the edge of the forest, the trees looming over them like silent sentinels, a cold breeze swept through, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them wanted to back down. They took a deep breath and stepped into the forest, unaware of the terror that awaited them. The group of friends consisted of 5: Lily, Max, Jordan, Emma, and Noah. They were all in their early teens, bound by a close friendship and a shared love for adventure. Lily, the ringleader, had always been fascinated by the stories of the Dark Woods. She had a knack for debunking myths and uncovering the truth behind local legends. Max, her older brother, was the brave one, always ready to protect the group. Jordan, the jokester, never took anything too seriously, but even he felt a shiver of fear as they approached the forest. Emma, the quiet one, was cautious but curious, while Noah, the youngest, was eager to prove himself. As they entered the forest, the atmosphere changed immediately. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer. The usual sounds of the town faded away, replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves underfoot. The path ahead was narrow and winding, barely visible through the dense undergrowth. Every step felt like it was leading them deeper into another world, one that didn't welcome visitors. Lily led the way, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. "It's just a forest," she said, trying to sound confident. "We've been in the woods before. There's nothing to be scared of." But as they walked, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, almost indistinguishable from the wind rustling through the trees. But then they grew clearer, soft, ghostly voices that seemed to be calling their names. Lily, Max, Emma. Jordan laughed nervously. "All right, who's playing tricks?" But there was no one else around, only the thick, silent trees. Noah stopped in his tracks, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The others nodded, fear creeping into their eyes. They continued on, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made them jump. The deeper they went, the more disoriented they became. The path that had seemed clear at first now twisted and turned in ways that made no sense. It was as if the forest itself was alive, shifting to confuse them, to keep them from finding their way out. Lily tried to keep them on track, but even she was starting to feel the weight of the forest's dark presence. They came across strange symbols carved into the bark of the tree, circles, lines, and shapes that none of them recognized. "What do you think these mean?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Max shook his head. "I don't know, but I don't like it. Maybe we should turn back." But when they turned around, the path they had taken seemed to have disappeared. The trees were closing now, their branches intertwined like a cage. Panic set in as they realized they were no longer sure which way was out, and the whispers were getting louder. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the more unsettling things became. The once clear path was now a tangled mess of roots and overgrown foliage, making it difficult to navigate. The air grew thicker, almost suffocating, as if the forest was closing in around them, and the whispers, they were no longer just faint murmurs. They had become distinct, calling each friend by name, echoing through the trees in a chorus of ghostly voices. Lily, Max, Jordan, Emma, Noah. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, surrounding them, filling the air with a sense of dread. "What is this place?" Jordan asked, his usual bravado gone, replaced by genuine fear. He spun around, trying to pinpoint the source of the whispers, but there was nothing, just shadows and trees. I don't like this, Lily, Emma whispered, her eyes wide with terror. We need to leave, now. Lily, who had been so confident before, was now struggling to keep her composure. She could feel the fear clawing at her insides, but she didn't want to panic. We'll be fine, she said, though her voice wavered. We just need to stay calm and stick together. But sticking together was becoming increasingly difficult. The forest seemed to be playing tricks on them, twisting the paths, making it impossible to find their way back. Every time they thought they were retracing their steps, they would end up in a different part of the forest, more disoriented than before. Then, they started seeing things, shadows that moved on them. Oh, figures standing just out of sight, watching them. Lily caught a glimpse of a figure in the distance, but when she shone her flashlight in that direction, it vanished. Did anyone else see that? She asked, her voice trembling. Max nodded, his face pale. I saw it too. Someone is out there. Noah, the youngest, was trembling with fear. What if it's the people from the stories? The ones who never came back. Don't say that. Emma snapped, her fear turning into anger. We're going to be fine. We just need to. But before she could finish, a loud snap echoed through the trees, followed by a rustling sound that seemed to be getting closer. The group froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, almost as if they were urging the group to stay, to come closer. What was that? George whispered, his voice barely audible. They all turned towards the sound, holding their breath. The rustling stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then, out of the darkness, a figure appeared, pale, gaunt, and barely human. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. It stood there, just a few feet away, staring at them. Emma let out a scream, and the group bolted, running as fast as they could through the twisted paths of the forest. But no matter how far they ran, they couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, of being followed. The forest was alive with whispers, with shadows that moved on their own, with figures that appeared and disappeared at will. They were no longer just lost, they were trapped. The Darkwoods had them now, and it wasn't going to let them go. Breathing heavily, the group slowed their frantic pace only when they couldn't run any further. Their lungs burned, and their legs trembled, but the terror gripping their minds was worse than any physical exhaustion. The forest, it seemed, had no end, no matter how far they ran. The dense trees, creeping vines, and darkness stretched endlessly before them. We're stuck. Trapped. Noah gasped, panic rising in his voice. He looked around, eyes wide with fear, expecting the pale figure to appear again at any moment. Lily's mind raced. She tried to think of a plan, anything that could let them out of this nightmare. But her thoughts were clouded, as if the whispers in the trees were worming their way into her brain, muddling her ability to think clearly. She shook her head, fighting the growing sense of doom. We have to keep moving, she said, though her voice was barely a whisper. We can't stay in one place. We need to find a way out. They pushed on, deeper into the forest. Though none of them was sure if they were heading in the right direction, the trees here were even taller, their twisted branches so dense that barely any light penetrated the canopy. Every sound, the rustling of leaves, the crack of a branch made them jump, their nerves on edge dot as they stumbled forward. They came upon something unexpected. Hidden beneath the shadows of the trees was an old cabin, its wooden walls warped with age, its windows broken. It looked abandoned. Yet somehow, it felt like someone or something was watching them from within. We should check inside, Max suggested, though his voice was filled with doubt. Maybe we'll find something. Maybe someone who can help. Lily hesitated, but they had no other options. Staying outside felt just as dangerous as going inside. Let's be quick, she said, leading the group toward the creaking door. They pushed it open, and the door swung with a long, eerie groan. Inside, the cabin was cold and damp. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, as if no one had set foot there in decades. Old furniture was scattered about broken chairs, a table with one leg missing, and a fireplace filled with soot. But there was something else, something unsettling on the far wall. Symbols were scrawled in black, jagged lines just like the ones they had seen on the trees earlier, circles, crosses, and other shapes that none of them could recognize, but all of them knew instinctively to fear. What is all this? Jordan asked, his voice shaky as he examined the symbols. Emma moved closer to the fireplace, where a small, tattered journal lay on the mantel. Dust covered its surface, but when she opened it, the pages inside were strangely clean, the writing sharp and clear. It's a diary, she whispered, her eyes scanning the words. It talks about the whispers, the voices in the forest. The group huddled around Emma as she read aloud. The diary belonged to a man who had lived in the cabin long ago. He had come to the forest seeking isolation, but soon after he arrived, he began hearing the whispers. The voices spoke to him, urging him to stay, to go deeper into the woods, promising him that the forest held great secrets. But the longer he stayed, the more he lost his mind, until he could no longer tell what was real and what wasn't. He talks about others too. Emma continued, her voice barely a whisper. Other people who came into the forest and never left. He says the forest takes them. It consumes them. Lily shivered. We need to leave. Now. But as they turned to go, a loud creak echoed from the second floor of the cabin. Something was moving upstairs. Max stepped forward, flashlight in hand. But before he could take another step, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. The group froze. Their breath caught in their throats. The air grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder than ever, surrounding them, coming from all directions. There's no way out, Jordan muttered, his face pale as he backed away from the door. Suddenly, the walls of the cabin began to tremble, the symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if they were building to something terrible. What's happening? Noah cried, his voice cracking with fear. Lily looked around frantically, her heart racing. The cabin wasn't safe, it was a trap. And now, whatever haunted the forest was closing in on them. The cabin's walls continued to tremble, the eerie symbols glowing brighter with each passing second. The whispers had grown into a deafening chorus, their voices overlapping in a maddening, unintelligible chant. The air inside the cabin became stifling, pressing down on the group, making it hard to breathe. Lily clutched the diary in her hands, her knuckles white. We have to get out of here, she shouted over the din, but her voice was barely audible above the noise. The others nodded, terror etched on their faces, but there was no clear way out. The door was sealed shut, and the windows were barred with heavy, rusted iron that looked as if it hadn't been moved in decades. Max took a step toward the staircase leading to the second floor. Maybe there's another way out upstairs, he suggested, though his voice betrayed his fear. But before he could reach the stairs, the floorboards beneath him groaned and split open with a loud crack, sending him tumbling into the darkness below. Max, Lily screamed, rushing to the edge of the gaping hole that had appeared in the floor, but all she could see was blackness. The whispers seemed to swell, as if they were mocking her, rejoicing in their new victim. No, no, no,
Jordan cried out, backing away from the hole. This isn't happening. This can't be real.
Emma, trembling uncontrollably, clung to Noah, who was too shocked to even cry. We have to find Max, she said, though her voice was barely a whisper. We can't leave him down there. But as they peered into the darkness, something else moved. Pale hands, long and bony, reached up from the hole, their fingers curling around
the edges of the broken floorboards.
Slowly, the figure began to pull itself up, gaunt, hollow-eyed, and wearing the same grotesque smile they had seen in the forest. No, Lily screamed, stumbling back as the figure emerged fully from the darkness. It was no longer human, its body twisted and deformed, its skin a sickly, ashen grey. The whispers grew louder, filling the cabin with their eerie chant, and the figure began to move toward them, its steps slow but deliberate. We have to go, Lily shouted, grabbing Emma's arm and pulling her toward the stairs. But as they turned, they saw that more figures were emerging from the shadows pale, twisted forms crawling out from beneath the floorboards, slipping through the cracks in the walls, and descending from the ceiling. The cabin was alive with them, a nightmarish horde
of the forest's lost souls, all drawn to the living warmth of the intruders who had dared to enter their domain. The group was surrounded, and there was nowhere left to run. Noah, run, Jordan yelled, shoving the younger boy toward the stairs. But Noah was frozen in place, his eyes wide with terror as the figures closed in.
Move, Jordan shouted again. But it was too late. One of the figures reached out, its bony hand wrapping around Noah's arm with a strength that belied its frail appearance. The boy screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the cacophony of whispers. The figure's grip tightened, pulling him closer, its empty eyes staring into his soul. The
others tried to reach him, but the horde was too dense, too overwhelming. Lily watched in horror as Noah was pulled into the darkness, his screams fading into the void. She turned to the others, her heart pounding. We have to go now.
They made a break for the stairs, but the cabin itself seemed to fight against them. The walls shifted, the floor buckled, and the stairs stretched impossibly high, as if trying to keep them trapped.
Figures crawled up the steps after them, their hands grasping at their ankles, their whispers echoing in their ears. By the time they reached the top, only Lily,
Max and Emma remained, panting and trembling. The attic was small, cluttered with old furniture and covered in dust. A single, small window offered a glimpse of the night outside, a night that seemed far darker and more malevolent than it had been before. There, Max gasped, pointing at the window. We can get out through there.
But as they approached the window, the whispers grew even louder, and the attic door slammed shut behind them.
The figures were not far behind, their gaunt faces pressing against the wood, their hands clawing at the door. Max tried to force the window open, but it was jammed, rusted shut from years of neglect. Come on, come on, he muttered desperately, using all his strength to pry it open. Lily turned back to the door, her heart hammering in her chest. The figures were getting closer, the door splintering under the weight of their assault. She looked around for something, anything they could use to defend themselves, but there was nothing. Emma, help Max,
she shouted, but Emma was paralyzed with fear, her eyes locked on the door as it began to give way. The whispers filled the room, drowning out all other sound, and the attic seemed to close in around them, the walls pressing tighter and tighter. Finally, with a loud crack, Max forced the window open. Go, now, he yelled, pushing Emma toward the window. She hesitated for a split second before climbing through, her body trembling as she squeezed through the narrow opening. Lily was right behind her, but as she started to climb out, the door burst open, and the figures flooded into the attic. Max turned to face them, trying to hold them back, but there were too many. The whispers were deafening now, filling his mind, twisting his thoughts. Max, come on, Lily screamed, reaching out for him, but he shook his head. Go, Lily. Get out of here, he said, his voice calm, resigned. He turned back to the figures, a determined look in his eyes. You're not taking her, he growled, with a final, desperate push. Lily climbed out of the window and dropped to the ground below. She landed hard, the impact knocking the wind out of her. Emma was already on her feet, grabbing Lily's arm and pulling her up. We have to run. But as they stumbled away from the cabin, Lily couldn't help but look back through the window. She saw Max standing his ground against the horde of twisted figures. He looked at her one last time, and then the shadows swallowed him whole. Lily and Emma ran, their hearts pounding, the cold night air biting at their skin. The whispers still echoed in their ears, though fainter now, as if the forest was reluctantly letting them go. Every step felt like a struggle, their legs heavy with exhaustion and fear. But they didn't dare stop, not until the cabin was far behind.
Then, swallowed by the darkness of the woods, the path twisted and turned. But somehow, they seemed to be moving toward the edge of the forest. The trees, once towering and oppressive, began to thin, allowing glimpses of the moonlit sky above. For the first time since they had entered the dark woods, there was a sliver of hope. Lily, look! Emma gasped, pointing ahead. Through the trees, they could see the faint glow of streetlight civilization. Safety, home. Lily felt a surge of relief, but it was quickly tempered by guilt. They had escaped, but at what cost?
Max, Noah, and Jordan were gone, last to the horrors of the forest. The weight of their last pressed heavily on her, but there was no time to grieve, not yet. We have to keep going, Lily said, though her voice was thick with emotion. We're almost there, with renewed determination. They pushed forward. The whispers faded. With every step, the darkness receding as they neared the forest's edge.
The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by the cool, fresh air of the night outside. Finally, they broke through the last line of trees and stumbled onto the road that bordered the forest. They collapsed on the pavement, gasping for breath, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. The streetlights cast a warm, familiar glow, a stark contrast to the cold, menacing darkness of the woods behind them. For a moment, they lay there, unable to speak, their minds reeling from the terror they had just escaped. But as the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of their situation set in. They were safe, but they were also alone, left with the haunting memories of what
they had witnessed in the dark woods. Emma was the first to speak, her voice small and shaky. What do we do now, Lily? What do we tell everyone? Lily didn't answer right away. She stared back at the forest, now just a shadowy mass in the distance. The whispers were gone, but she could still feel their presence, lingering at the edge of her mind. We tell them the truth, she said finally, her voice firm, about what happened, about the forest.
About the others. But will they believe us? Emma asked, her eyes wide with fear. Lily shook her head. I don't know, but we have to try. People need to know what's out there, what's waiting in the dark woods. They sat in silence for a moment longer, gathering the strength to stand.
As they did, a chill ran down Lily's spine, and she glanced back at the forest one last time. The trees stood silent and still, as if nothing had happened. But she knew better. The dark woods had taken its toll, and it wouldn't stop. It was a place of secrets and shadows, and it would claim more victims unless someone stopped it. With that thought weighing heavily on her, Lily took Emma's hand, and together they began the long walk back to town. They had survived the night, but the memory of the forest would haunt them forever.
Weeks passed, but the events of that night in the dark woods never left Lily's mind. She and Emma tried to return to their normal lives, but the shadows of the forest clung to them, always just out of sight. The townspeople listened to their story with skepticism, some dismissing it as a frightened child's fantasy, while others
Whispered that perhaps the forest really was cursed, but no one dared to venture near the woods after dark anymore. Lily found herself drawn to the edge of the forest, standing just outside the tree line, staring into the depths where her friends had vanished.
The whispers were gone, but she could still feel the forest watching, waiting. She knew the truth that the dark woods was alive, a place of ancient, malevolent power that fed on the fear of those who entered. She had survived, but the forest had taken something from her, something she could never get back, and she knew that it would continue to take unless someone put an end to it. But how? How do you fight something that isn't entirely of this world? Something that thrives on darkness and secrets? The questions plagued her, day and night. One day, as she stood at the edge of the woods, she heard a voice, a familiar, ghostly whisper. Lily. She turned sharply, but there was no one there. Her heart raced as she realized that the forest wasn't done with her yet. It was calling her back, daring her to return, to uncover the last of its secrets. But this time, she wouldn't go in unprepared. She would learn everything she could about the forest, about its history, its curse,
and its weaknesses. Lily made a vow that day, standing on the border between the safety of the town and the malevolent darkness of the woods. She would return to the dark woods, but not as a victim. She would come back as its conqueror, to finally end the whispers, the shadows, and the curse that had claimed so many lives. And as she turned to leave, she couldn't help but wonder how many others would heed the call of the forest before she could stop it. How many more would disappear into the shadows, never to return?
If you ever find yourself near the edge of the dark woods, remember Lily's story, remember the warnings, and whatever you do, don't listen to the whispers.